Welcome back, everyone. So, in this episode, we're going to finish up our conversation on private money lending. We're going to end up talking about the main ways that private money lenders get their cash, where they get it from. And then also, we're going to talk about how that affects the ultimate strategy and results as far as arranging your private money deal. So, how that all affects the length of the loan, the interest, the payments, and items like that. This is going to be a great way to cap off our episode about private money lending. And then with the next episode, we'll start delving back into day-to-day management of properties. So to talk about vehicles of private money lending, the first one we're going to talk about is a self-directed IRA. So a self-directed IRA is different than a 401k. A 401k is something that requires a stockbroker or portfolio manager attached to it. These are the people that are ones that can truly make trades or anything associated with the account. A self-directed IRA, the person who owns it has control over the trades. You can make the trade yourself. You don't need to go and get them approved by anybody. You have complete control over that. If you've ever seen the notation SDIRA, that is a self-directed IRA. Now, the first thing to understand about self-directed IRAs is that there are categories of disqualified people. And disqualified people are those that cannot benefit from a loan from a self-directed IRA. So who's the first category of disqualified persons? The owner of the self-directed IRA and their spouse. So you cannot take out a loan from your self-directed IRA. Your spouse can't take one out against yours. That is something that is forbidden. Disqualified person category number 2 is your lineal ascendants of your family tree. So we're talking about those going up your family tree. Your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents. If you happen to have great-great-grandparents that are still alive, they also cannot benefit from a loan from a self-directed IRA that is yours. Now, the third category of disqualified people, if you're following along, this might be easy for you. Lineal descendants of your family tree. So this is your children, your grandchildren. Of course, their spouses are included in here. And it also includes stepchildren. So don't necessarily think that having a stepson or a stepdaughter is sort of a workaround to this category. They are also included in the disqualified persons. So those are the 3 people that cannot benefit from a loan on a self-directed IRA. So you cannot borrow from your grandparents' self-directed IRA. You can't borrow from your child or things like that. You cannot have any sort of loan from those to purchase real estate. Now, the one thing I want to talk about here is this idea of tax advantages. If you're a fan of Robert Kiyosaki, you've read maybe some of the Rich Dad Poor Dad books, some of his books. You're likely familiar with the idea that when you get to be in your 60s and 70s, your tax situation is going to be much different than it is in your 30s and 40s. The reason for this is because there's sort of these age-specific tax deductions that come along with milestones in life. The 2 ones that come to mind the most frequently are tax credits for underage children and then tax deductions for paying interest on your mortgage. When you get to be 65, 70, you likely don't have children that qualify for a tax credit for you. And you also likely have paid off your home as well. So you don't have that mortgage interest deduction. So there's two tax deductions that are gone off the plate that are changing your tax situation when you're in your 60s and 70s. The reason I bring this up is because self-directed IRAs, you are not taxed when you put the money into it, but you're taxed when you take it out. This is something I want to be sure we all understand, because if you're going to go the avenue of using self-directed IRA as a vehicle for your private money lender, if you're dealing with somebody who is uneducated, there's a little bit of ethical responsibility for you to explain to your private money lender that an SDIRA, they aren't taxed on it when they put money in, which means they're taxed when it comes out, and that they may want to research what exactly their tax situation might look like when they're in their 60s and 70s versus when they're in their 30s and 40s as they are maybe right now. I think it's really important that we have this conversation with our private money lenders because it's only going to be beneficial for us both. We're building a level of trust with them. We're letting them know, hey, I know about these things. I've got a knowledge of these things. I want to be sure that you understand this so that you aren't necessarily put in a bad situation. So it's a good thing to disclose to your private money lender, especially if you're dealing with somebody who might not be very educated in investing or retirement planning. So we know that the self-directed IRA is taxed when money gets taken out of it. As far as the income from the private money loan, the first thing we want to understand is that private money loan does not have any tax benefits because it's taxed as ordinary income. So any money that anyone makes on issuing a private money loan, it's totally taxed as ordinary income. If Sally lends me $100,000 to make a real estate deal, and I pay her back and she earns $18,000, that $18,000 is taxed as ordinary income in the year that I paid it to her. So it's really important that we understand this when we're trying to determine what we're going to use a self-directed IRA for. This is why self-directed IRAs are better for fix and flips and BRRRRs. So buy, rehab, rent, refinance. I always get those confused in my head. This is why it's best for those shorter term loans, ones that you're likely going to be able to repay in a year or less. So we use these for fix and flips. So if you're a flipper, a self-directed IRA is a good option for you. A BRRRR, if you're having something where you're going to rehab it, rent it, and then go to the bank and refinance it out and then use that money to pay Sally back, great. Self-directed IRA are a great short-term private loan, but it's not anything that's really meant for long-term. If you want to talk about long-term deals, then you're getting more into cash or our next category, which is real estate equity. I read an article, I want to say it was like 6 or 8 months ago, and I feel like it might be out of date now because of COVID, but around 30% of homeowners in the United States own their homes free and clear, which I thought was a kind of staggering high number. I didn't think it would be that high. But this leads into the conversation about having equity in real estate and utilizing it. So many people likely have some form of equity in their private residence. As you pay down your mortgage, you're paying down the principal. You're also maybe possibly getting just market appreciation on your property, and therefore you're getting equity. Now, the other place that people can have real estate equity beyond their primary home is if they have a second home like a lake house or a cottage. That's also another place that they could go and get real estate equity. So a primary home or a secondary home are places they can get real estate equity. There are 2 different ways that they can pull it out. So the first way they can pull it out is through a new mortgage. So the owner of the property can simply refinance it with a new mortgage and at that time pull out their equity. The other way that they can do it is through getting a second mortgage to pull out the equity that's in there. Now, what's important to understand with the new mortgage or second mortgage strategy is that the owner of that property will immediately have to start making monthly payments on the debt. Now, immediately is usually like, I think 45, 60 days typically for a mortgage, but it really does come up quickly. And this is something that you want to be aware of when you are creating your final terms with your private money lender. If they are using a new mortgage or a second mortgage to fund this lending expedition with you, you should be aware of the fact that they are immediately making payments on that money, and that needs to be calculated into your strategy. You need to be sure that you are not leaving them high and dry and sort of moving around with pennies and changing their cable plan and maybe foregoing eating out at all to just be able to make that new monthly mortgage payment. Again, a little bit of ethical responsibility here is just having a conversation and making sure that they aren't spreading themselves too thin by doing this. And it should definitely play into how you approach your private money lending situation. If you have someone who is taking out a new mortgage or a second mortgage, you need to be aware of the implications for them if you aren't able to make maybe monthly payments for them to pay that, or what happens if the deal just goes completely sour for you. This is different than borrowing from somebody's self-directed IRA. This person who has a mortgage that they've taken out to lend to you is really going to kind of be up the creek if your numbers don't line up, the market shifts. This is why exit strategies are almost more important in private money lending when you're dealing with new mortgage or second mortgages, because they've got something on the line immediately. Now, the other way that people can take advantage of equity in a residence is by doing a home equity line of credit, or a HELOC. So the way a HELOC works, if you're not familiar, is the equity line gives borrowers the right to borrow against the equity in their home, but it doesn't give them a lump sum of cash as a refinance does. So if your person is going to the bank and doing a refinance, they're coming away with a check for, $45,000, $120,000, whatever it is. They're walking away with this check. With a HELOC, it sits there until you take it out. The way that it was explained to me in college, actually, in a finance class, is if we compare the habit of going to Best Buy and buying maybe nowadays a $10,000 TV, and you put it on your credit card. What happens is if you don't pay it back within that statement period, you end up paying interest on it. Switch that over to a private money lending situation. You pull money out of a HELOC, you pull that $10,000 out. Maybe you're not buying a TV with it. You're buying real estate with it. But once you take that out, you then begin to accumulate interest on it. Now, what's important to understand about HELOCs is that the rate most likely will change on a monthly basis, and the payments are interest only. That's the key difference between HELOC and second mortgages. With a second mortgage, the payments that the owner of the property pays are paying down interest as well as the principal. With a HELOC, any payments the person is making are strictly going towards interest. So going back to this strategy idea of how does this affect your final product for a private money lending deal, if you have somebody with a HELOC, they are only going to be paying interest when they make payments on that HELOC, which really, I think, brings, again, another added sense of urgency or a higher level of calculations in your mathematics to be sure that you can cover this interest. And you have to be aware of the fact that their interest can fluctuate. In a very volatile market, that interest rate can fluctuate significantly over the course of, 4 months, 5 months, 6 months. So this is definitely something that you want to be aware of when you're creating a private money lending situation that's based on a HELOC, is understand that in this situation, their interest, their payments, they aren't necessarily going to be static. When you do a second mortgage or a new mortgage for equity, their payment's always going to be $232.16, $232.16. With a HELOC, it could be $143.12 one month. It could be $175.76 the other month. And then maybe it's down to like $91.32 another month. So it's really important that you keep that in mind when you're creating your terms for a HELOC private money lending deal. Now, the third way that people can invest in real estate with you is through cash. And this is really what I consider the most flexible form of real estate investing. The reason I think it's the most flexible is because there aren't payments associated with it. There isn't this added sort of hurdle of figuring out the tax situation of now versus when they're older. So generally speaking, I prefer for private money lenders to be a cash situation. So cash can be money they have sitting in a savings account, a checking account. Hopefully it's not just under the mattress at their house, but it can also include any investments that they've made themselves in stocks that are independent of a self-directed IRA or independent of a 401k. So, for instance, over the years, I've dabbled in sort of some general stock investing. Right now, I'm heavily in Vanguard and other sort of indexed funds like that. But sometimes I've invested in different stocks like Kohl's, or I owned Tesla at one point early on. So that's the sort of investments I'm talking about that sort of count as cash because they're liquid. You can go and sell your 50 shares of Tesla, which, I mean, if you have 50 shares of Tesla now and you bought them early on, I mean, wow, talk about getting a windfall there. But anyway, they can get their liquid cash, they can give it to you, and they can invest, and then you can invest with it. This is almost the cleanest way to do it because there's no payments, there's no interest that's associated with the other side of it on the private money lender side. It's sort of the cleanest way to get into it. If this is your first foray into doing private money lending and you are using someone who is uneducated, you might want to try and find somebody who can do it with cash just because it makes the entire situation of negotiations much easier. Now, regardless of where your private money lender gets their cash from, there's certain things that you want to be sure and talk about ahead of time with a private money lender and get situated. So one of the first things is the length of the loan. Again, you might want to consider this as far as how that private money lender becomes the lender, what vehicle they're using. But of course, you want to have an idea of whether this is going to be a 12-month, 18-month, 36-month loan. Your private money lender does need sort of like an end date of where the buck stops. Now, it's not to say that it can't be sort of re-upped or renegotiated again, but there should always be an end term to any private money lending deal that you put together. Oh my God, burpee. Okay, so we've gone through the vehicles of private money lending. Now let's really get into the terms for a couple minutes here. So the first thing we want to always talk about with our private money lender ahead of time is what exactly the length of the loan is. So are they looking for short-term, 12-month, 18-month? Are they okay with something that's more, medium term, 36 months, 48 months? Are they going longer term? Are they going 3 to 5 years? That's something you want to know. And in the back of your mind, you also want to kind of know what financial expenses or burdens this person might have coming up. So maybe you have someone whose daughter is getting married in 18 months and it's going to be this big blowout bash on, Jamaica. Have in the back of your mind that they're likely going to need a fair amount of cash when the wedding time comes up. So keep that in mind when you're figuring out what your exit strategy is going to be. You want to be able to perform on that term, even if you don't think they're counting on that money for that financial event. See, private money lenders love being paid on time, but they love it even more when you recognize that they have some financial event on the horizon that it would really be beneficial for them to have access to this money at that time. So just make a mental note, put it in your file of any sort of financial events that may be on the horizon for your private money lender that you likely want to be sure and have them paid back before that event. When we talk about the term of the loan, that's going to affect the interest rate. A short-term private money loan has a higher interest rate than a medium-term one. You might be scratching your head and thinking, well, why is that? Well, the reason that's that way is because it all comes down to how much money they make. With a private money lender who is only in it for 12 months, they only have 12 months to make cash on that deal. So they're going to have a slightly higher interest rate than someone who's going to be in it for 36, 48 months and has 48 months to accumulate a financial benefit from that transaction. So in a short-term loan, you could easily end up between 8 and 12%. I'm not sure if that's completely accurate right now, because I hate saying this, but COVID has probably changed private money lending as well. But generally speaking, 8 to 12% was the average for like a short-term one. A medium term, you were getting closer to probably about the 5 to probably 7% range, maybe even 8. So yeah, let's say 5 to 8 for medium. So when you're negotiating these things, this is what you want to kind of be aware of. Okay, this is a short-term loan. Do they have a payment on it? So is this money come from a second mortgage? Is this money going to come from a HELOC? Is there going to be interest-only payments associated with it? And you want to put that into your equation as far as what the interest rate's going to be. Because again, if somebody's going to have a payment attached to this, you want to be sure that that interest rate is going to be sufficient to cover the interest on the loan that they're taking out or the interest on the HELOC. Now, the HELOC, again, you can't predict, but generally we can kind of put things in there that allow it to be able to cover the most average situation for a HELOC interest. So our interest rate is going to be determined by the length of the loan. It's also going to be determined by the vehicle that the private money lender uses. And then third, how risky your investment is. So there are times that how risky the property is of an investment can play into how much interest rate should be on a private money loan. In most cases, you're only going to have that added factor when you're dealing with an experienced real estate private money lender. So someone who either does this, I don't want to say for a living, but has done this consistently in real estate or is currently or has been a real estate investor, they're likely going to say, you know what? This is a risky investment for this property. I think I need another percent or 1.5% attached to the interest rate because there's a fair amount of risk here. So that will definitely possibly play into your interest rate. Again, if you're dealing with a risky property. And the third thing you always want to be sure and discuss with your private money lender is the other exit strategies that you have. So for instance, your exit strategy may be with a BRRRR, you're using it short term and then you're going to go and refinance it. Well, what's your exit strategy if it turns out you don't get the rehab done on time, or you can't necessarily go straight to a bank and get it refinanced because lending is finicky at the moment? What is your backup plan for getting that private money lender paid? Are you going to pull money out of maybe your own self-directed IRA, your own investments? Are you going to maybe go and get hard money and then pay off the private money lender in hopes then of being able to refinance fairly quickly after that? Exit strategies should always be created whenever you make a real estate deal. And honestly, they're more important when you're dealing with private money lending, because you want to be able to reuse that private money lender. If you leave them holding the bag, even for a short amount of time, it decreases the likelihood that that private money lender is going to lend to you again. So definitely be sure you have your exit strategies in place, that you know what they are. And if need be, try and afford that into your calculations a little bit. So like I said, if you end up having to go to a hard money lender, make sure there's a little bit extra play in your numbers so that if you have to go to a private money lender, it's not going to completely cripple you or the deal. I hope you guys have enjoyed this sort of deep dive, but still skimming the surface as far as private money lending goes. I feel like it was kind of all over the place, but I hope you still got some good information out of it. With the next podcast, we're going to return to like day-to-day management ideas. We're going to probably do away with the theme, running the theme for a little bit, because since I do episodes every other week, themes actually tend to run a little bit long. So this one's been a 2-month theme, even though it's only been 3 episodes. So my goal is to get a couple more just individual episodes out. And then I do have another series planned probably for, I would say, mid or late summer. But I want to do a couple, maybe like four sessions just on individual topics, and then maybe delve into another series again. If you guys have any suggestions for upcoming episodes, please pop over onto Instagram at Landlord Chick. You can find me there. Send me a direct message. 2 of the upcoming messages or episodes are actually from Instagram messages from listeners. So I thank you very much for that. I'm glad you guys are here. I love hearing from you guys. Hope you're enjoying this podcast, and I will see you next time.